Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC Civil Services Examination. Today we have taken up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 19th of February 2021. The articles which we are going to discuss today are displayed on your screen. So let us now begin the discussion. So the first news which we have taken for discussion appears on page number 9. Biometric authentication to benefit farmers, says Centre. So in an effort to cut out the middlemen and ensure greater transparency in the procurement of farm produce, the Centre is encouraging the states to deploy biometric authentication of farmers. Now, this becomes a very important concept as far as GS paper 2 is concerned, because you have a line in the syllabus which says welfare schemes for vulnerable sections of population by Centre in states and the performance of these schemes. We know that most of the schemes of the central and state governments as far as vulnerable sections are concerned is about transfer of some or the other kinds of benefits, whether it is a cash. For example, in case of scholarships, it could be about non-cash, for example, direct delivery of food, as in the case of PDS, whatever it may be. India has a lot of benefits transfer to its vulnerable population. And since the time of independence, these benefit transfer has faced a lot of issues, and because of that, the government is increasingly adopting direct benefit transfer. So in this discussion, we are going to understand why is there a need to adopt direct benefit transfer? Then what are the three modes or models of direct benefit transfer? What is the process through which the benefit is transferred directly to the beneficiary? What are its benefits? And then finally, what are the challenges which still plague the direct benefit transfer? So let us now begin the discussion. So starting with benefit transfer. We know that India is a welfare state and has always committed significant resources to provide subsidies and services to general public and to certain identified segments of the population. So if this black circle represents the overall population of India, and if red dots represent poor people, vulnerable people, and black ones are the well-off, then it is a commitment of the government of India to provide for the basic necessities of these people, which are red in color. And so that is why it requires the government of India to transfer the benefits to them. Now, over the years, the amount of money spent on the welfare programs has reached staggering levels. As you can see on your screen, if we include all the subsidies given to the poor population, it has massively increased, and of course, rightly so. But the problem is that the benefits of these schemes, these transfers, although being done by the central government, is not reaching the red dots. They are lost somewhere because there have been concerns about the delivery of benefits to the intended beneficiary. We don't want these benefits to just reach the population. We want these benefits to reach to the right people. And that is where the whole problem is. So let us first understand the two ways in which these benefits are transferred, namely cash and non-cash. So the cash transfer would include schemes like Manrega, scholarship, National Social Assistance Program, where a fixed sum of amount is transferred to a beneficiary and handed out to him or her. Whereas non-cash benefit transfer would involve physical delivery of an identified good at a lower price. And both these methods have their own share of problems. For example, when it is about cash transfers, it faces a lot of leakages. When the money starts from the central government, it goes to the state government, then finally to the district level, and then finally it is dispersed. Once these many layers of transactions are conducted, a lot of resources are lost in between these transactions because there are leakages. What are those leakages? So first and foremost is a genuine error. So it is expected that these benefits would reach the red dots. But due to errors in identification, some of the black dots are identified as red ones, and so they get the benefits even though they are not entitled to it. So that would be called as inclusion error. You have included someone who was not entitled to get the benefit for that. And then similarly, there would be exclusion errors where you have excluded some of the people from the benefits of the schemes, whereas they were entitled for that. But most of these cases could have been a genuine case, but there is a lot of corruption as well because there is no accountability, there is no transparency, and so there are a lot of ghost beneficiaries.
So as you can see on this screen, around 19.96 lakh host beneficiaries were identified at Assam's Anganwadi centers. So what it essentially means is that there is no real person to which the benefit is being distributed, but they just exist on paper just to siphon off the money being allocated to that imaginary person. So when the government decides to transfer cash, these are the problems which it faces. But when the government decides to directly deliver the products, for example, the food grains to the beneficiaries, there are some other kinds of challenges. So how is it exactly done? Government acquires these commodities from the market or from controlled markets. Then these goods are delivered to the beneficiary at a lower price. For example, all of you must remember that 5 to 6 years ago, even LPG cylinders were distributed to the beneficiaries through this method. So what you essentially have in India is a market where the same commodity is being sold for two prices. One is the market price on which everyone is entitled to get that product. Second is the subsidized price, which is meant for vulnerable sections or people living below poverty line. Now, this obviously is against the market forces. It distorts the market because you have a situation where in a single market, a product is available for two prices, and hence there is an opportunity for arbitrage. Now, arbitrage is nothing but a businessman taking advantage of the fact that the same product is available at two prices at two different locations. But here, at the same physical location, you have the same product for two different prices. And so, what it does, it leads to diversion of supplies. The subsidized product is transferred to the beneficiaries at a lower price, and which is then not delivered to the beneficiaries but rather to the market, and the profit is earned by the intermediaries. So let's say that if there is an LPG cylinder whose market price is 800 rupees, so this is the price at which it is available to everyone, but government is transferring the same LPG cylinder at rupees 400 to below poverty line people. But instead of reaching them, that cylinder reaches the 800 market, and this 400 rupees profit is made by a lot of people. Apart from that, a lot of administrative apparatus is needed just to ensure the delivery of these goods and services to the right kind of people, which again involves a lot of burden on behalf of the exchequer. Now you should note that these are the typical problems faced while we deliver the non-cash subsidies at the doorstep of the beneficiary. But the problems of leakages, exclusion and inclusion error are also faced when we talk about non-cash subsidies. And so you can understand that how inefficient that system was. But we did not have any option, right? But with the advent of biometrics, faster internet connection, penetration of mobile phones, and also increasing reach of banking facilities, now what we have is automating the transfer. Now we have the option to automate the transfer and to authenticate to beneficiaries about his or her transfers, which was not available earlier, like 10 years ago or even before that. So let us first understand the whole process of automating these transfers. So what you have essentially initially is the population which is not on Aadhaar. So you first need to enroll them, get their Aadhaar card done. So enrollment of beneficiaries for generation of Aadhaar numbers is the first stage. Now, starting with a population which doesn't have any Aadhaar number, now you have a population where a lot of people or most of the people, especially belonging to the vulnerable section, have one. The next stage would be to bring the details of these beneficiaries on IT platforms. So which means digitizing the beneficiary database. Why is it required to digitize their database? Because unless and until you digitize their database, you won't be able to include or exclude them from any of the particular government schemes. You won't be able to know whether they are rich or they are poor. And so that is why once you get them on the Aadhaar platform, the next stage would be to do the survey and to digitize that survey. Next stage would be to open their bank accounts, because of course you have to make sure the transfers happen. And for direct benefit transfer to occur, each and every beneficiary must have a bank account. And so there is a task to bring unbanked population in the banking purview through opening of bank accounts. Then how does the government know that which bank account belongs to which person and which Aadhaar number? And so that is why you need to seed Aadhaar in database bank accounts. And so beneficiaries' bank accounts and database needs to be seeded with Aadhaar. And then finally, there needs to be a last mile connectivity. Because for urban population, the ATM machine seems to be a very triviality. But if you go to the rural areas, these bank branches and these ATMs are virtually non-existent. And so that is why you need a network of banking correspondents, so that when central government transfers this amount directly into their bank account, the people are able to withdraw that money and it can become useful to them. So this is all about direct benefit transfer directly from the central government to the beneficiary's account, avoiding the process of any intermediary and hence no leakage. Since you have already digitized the database, the exclusion and inclusion error is already minimized. All the beneficiaries' accounts have been seeded with Aadhaar, so the ghost beneficiaries can also be easily eliminated. Because one person has one Aadhaar, and so that person will be enrolled only once in this scheme. So now a basic question arises as to how many kinds of benefit transfer or the direct benefit transfer can exist in a country like India. And so there are three modes or models of direct benefit transfer. First, of course, is direct delivery of cash benefits, right? So instead of directly delivering the cash to a person entitled for scholarship, the government can directly transfer the amount into his or her bank account. Then of course, second is direct delivery of non-cash benefits. And the best example of this would be the subsidy given out to the LPG cylinders. So what government does is that lets the vulnerable population buy LPG from the market at the market price, and whatever be the subsidy is transferred directly in their bank account. And so it is much more efficient, because now you have a situation. Now if you remember this particular example, we had a situation where in a single market we had two prices from the same product. Now through this particular scheme, government has eliminated the two prices. What government is saying that all the LPG cylinders shall be available only at rupees 800, and whoever is the beneficiary will directly get a support of 400 from the government into her bank account. So this will take away any incentive for the arbitrage or for the intermediaries to take advantage of these dual prices. And then the third way, of course, is conversion of non-cash benefits to cash. Now what is this? So for example, government is currently delivering food through its public distribution system to the beneficiaries. What government can do is that calculate each and every household's entitlement every month and transfer the same amount into her bank account directly and ask that household to purchase the food grains from the market. Now this is quite complicated, and it's a discussion in its own as to why it is very difficult to do, especially in case of complicated items like food grains. But nonetheless, these are the three ways to deliver directly the benefit to the beneficiary. Now of course, it has its own share of benefits and challenges. Now, transparency and accountability are not difficult to think of, because all beneficiaries have their Aadhaar number. One person can have only one Aadhaar, and once you connect the bank account of the beneficiary with his or her Aadhaar number, of course, there cannot be any ghost beneficiary, or at least the doing so will be very difficult. And since the money is directly going into the accounts of the beneficiary, it is very easy. It is very easy to track or trace any sum of money going into wrong bank accounts. So it increases the accountability on behalf of the government functionaries. Because earlier, the disbursement of cash and where it went and how it went would have been very difficult to trace. But since the money is going into directly bank accounts, it has now become very easier. Then because of direct benefit transfers, delays are cut to a great level, because unlike earlier where the money would have been transferred from center to state to district level to the beneficiary, now the money is directly coming from the central government as far as central sector schemes are concerned, and from the state directly to the beneficiary as far as state schemes are concerned. So the delays are minimized to a great extent. Then it leads to reduction in government expenses for carrying out these schemes, because now since most of the beneficiaries have their bank account and there does not need to be any single person or authority to discharge or dispense the cash to the right authorities. Then, as we have seen in case of LPG, it of course encourages free and fair markets, especially if the direct benefit transfer is in the form of a commodity that is non-cash. Then if all the money or most of the money dispensed from the center reaches the beneficiary, then it means it increases the money circular, then it means it will increase the money circulation in the economy, because ultimately that cash will be spent by the vulnerable sections. And finally, it leads to the empowerment as well. Now, why will it lead to empowerment? It will lead to empowerment because now the data have been digitized, and all the people can go and download that PDF and see who are the beneficiaries of that scheme, and they can show that they have received or not received such a such amount through which they are entitled into their bank accounts. And so it has led to a lot of empowerment as well. But as they say, there is no rose without a thorn, and so it has its own fair share of challenges, which are, first and foremost, is proper utilization of benefits. Now, here the main concern of some of the social thinkers and political leaders is that when the government distributes goods directly to the households, its purpose is defined, but when you transfer the cash, it may be misused. So there is a difference between giving LPG cylinder to a household and giving 800 rupees per month to that household. Especially since males have higher access to banks, and also the level of addiction among males is higher, there are a lot of concern as to how that sum of money will be utilized by a particular household. Not just that, most of the rural India is still unbanked. Even though we have banking correspondence network, but still most of the people are financially illiterate to avail such facilities. And so that is where the main challenges are being faced by direct benefit transfer schemes. And then finally, the grievance redressal mechanism for most of the schemes which have adopted direct benefit transfer is still at a very nascent stage. And now I will leave you with this particular news which appeared in newspaper in 2018 and 19, where a lot of starvation deaths occurred in Jharkhand. And this was because of the fact that a lot of poor people were not able to link their ration cards to Aadhaar cards. And so when the government implemented direct benefit transfer, they were not able to get the benefit and they starved to death because of lack of access to food grains. And so when we design or when we implement such schemes, we always have to keep in mind the kind of inequality we are dealing with in our country. And so all schemes have to address these peculiar challenges which the society of India faces. So in this particular discussion, we started by first understanding as to what benefit transfer is, what were the challenges faced in the traditional way through which the government of India was transferring these benefits. Then we understood how direct benefit transfer is going to address most of these challenges, what is the procedure, what are its benefits, and what are the challenges still plaguing the direct benefit transfer. Let's now move on to the next news. This next news appears on page number 1. Puducherry L-G orders floor test on Monday. And so the newly appointed Lieutenant Governor of Puducherry on Thursday directed the Assembly Secretariat to conduct the floor test on February 22nd. And so in this regard, it is very, very important for us to understand certain very, very relevant concepts with respect to the union territories, not just with regard to their constitution formation, their basis, the parts from which they derive their existence, how are their departure from the federalist structure of our country, and what are the important differences between a state and a union territory. So we'll start by first understanding the constitutional basis of a creation of a union territory. So if you look in the part 1 of the Constitution of India, which deals with the union and its territory, and if you look in Article 1, it says India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states, and in that the clause 3 says the territory of India shall comprise the territories of state. The union territories is specified in the first schedule. So that is where the origination of the union territories lies in. Union territories are mentioned in the first schedule to the Constitution of India, and they are mentioned in Article 1 as well. So the obvious question is, how many union territories are there in the country right now? So let us count them. Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh, Chandigarh, Delhi, Daman and Diu and Dadra and Nagar Haveli, Lakshadweep, Puducherry and Andaman and Nicobar Island. So there are 8 union territories in India right now, as you can see on the map. And so if you have to broadly define the union territories, we can say that they are those areas in our country which are under the direct control and administration of the central government. And sometimes they are also known as centrally administered territories. Now, most of you must have some vague understanding of the constitutional mechanism, and you must be knowing that the states are members of the federal system in India and share a distribution of power with the center. But the union territories, on the other hand, are those areas which are under the direct control and administration of the central government. And now the question arises that when these union territories were created in 1956 after the State Reorganization Act, what would have been the reason to dilute the federal structure of our country? Why is not each and every place in our country shares the same kind of distribution of power across the country? Why is this differentiation created? And so, there are four very clearly defined reasons behind that. First, of course, is a political and administrative reason. And so when you have a situation like national capital, or you have a situation like when two states share a common capital, you cannot put them any one single state's jurisdiction. And so that is why Delhi and Chandigarh have been created union territories. Then you have cultural distinctiveness or uniqueness of a place. For example, if you consider Puducherry, Daman and Diu, Dadra and Nagar Haveli, all these three union territories, they were earlier not the part of the British India, but they were controlled by other colonial powers. And so when they merged themselves into our country, they were quite distinct, and had we merged them into their surrounding states, for example Gujarat, it would not have been fair for the local population, and so that is why they were kept under the central control. Then a lot of places in our country, for example Andaman and Nicobar, Lakshadweep Islands, they have a lot of strategic significance, and so that is why central government would always want to control them directly. The recent bifurcation of the state of Jammu and Kashmir into Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh can be categorized as one motivated by strategic importance. Then, some of the areas require very special treatment and care because they are inhabited by very backward and tribal people not yet assimilated into mainstream of our country. For example, Mizoram, Manipur, Tripura and Arunachal Pradesh. So earlier all these northeastern states were union territories. Of course, later on they became proper states. Now, when we talk about the Constitution of India, which is the part which deals with the provisions of administrations related to the Union Territory, and that is Part 8 of the Constitution of India, starting from Article 239 to 241, as you can see on the screen. And even though all the Union Territories belong to one category, there is no uniformity in their administrative system. Every Union Territory is administered by President acting through an administrator appointed by him. And so an administrator of a union territory is an agent of the president and not the head of the state like a governor. And president can specify the designation of an administrator. It may be lieutenant governor or chief commissioner or administrator. And as you can see on the screen, there are different designations for each of the union territories. So let us now quickly understand the main differences between a state and a union territory. So as we've already stated, states refer to administrative division which has their own elected government. Some union territories might have their own elected government, but that does not take away the fact that they are ultimately controlled and regulated by the union government. States have a federal relationship with the central government wherein the sovereign legislative and executive powers are distributed between states and union concerning the state. Whereas if you look at union territories, it has a unitary relationship with the central government, that is, most of the powers rest in the hands of the union. The constitutional head of the state is the governor in case of a state, whereas the president is the executive head of the union territories. States are administered by chief minister elected by the people, whereas in case of union territories, excepting the two union territories, they are administered by an administrator who is appointed by the president. The area of the state is comparatively large. The union territories are quite small. States ultimately possess autonomy, which is not seen in the case of union territories. And so you can summarize the fact that creation of union territories is a kind of departure from the federalism model which India has followed. And so what are the claims which we can make in the favor of this particular statement? Because people will say that two of the union territories, namely National Capital Territory of Delhi and Puducherry, have legislative assembly, and so at least in appearance they are quite similar to the states. But that is not the reality. And let us start by first understanding what are the legislative powers which have been given to the Legislative Assembly of the Puducherry. So the Legislative Assembly of Puducherry can make laws on matters of state and the concurrent list. So you can say that they have the same power. But Parliament can make laws in matters related to Puducherry on any of the list. So Parliament can legislate on any matter, be it from the state list or concurrent list, as far as it concerns the Puducherry, which the Parliament cannot do for any other state. So that is one difference between the state and the union territory having the legislative assembly also. Then let us look at the provisions of part 8. Article 239 says that each union territory will be administered by president through an administrator. And then Article 239A and Article 239AA make provisions for creation of Legislative Assembly and Council of Ministers for Puducherry and National Capital Territory of Delhi respectively. But both of them contain a provision which gives power to the Parliament to amend the provisions related to the functioning of Puducherry and Delhi government at its own will, and that shall not be considered an amendment under Article 368, which is very, very important. So the Parliament can change the arrangement of Delhi government or Legislative Assembly of the government or Puducherry without attracting the provisions of the Article 368, which means that shall not be considered an amendment of the Constitution of India. Then in case of Puducherry, President can legislate by making regulations, but only when the assembly is suspended or dissolved, which again is not possible in case of states. And then comes the relationship of L-G with that of Council of Ministers. We know that in case of states, governor is to act on aid and advice of Council of Ministers. But in case of Puducherry specifically, it is given that L-G is to act on aid and advice of Council of Ministers. But the same provision also says that L-G can act on his discretion, especially in the matters of lawmaking, even though the Council of Ministers has the task of aiding and advising him, so it is pointless. And in case of difference of opinion between L-G and his ministers on any matter, the administrator is bound to refer it to President for a decision and act according to the decision taken by the President. So you can see that how curtailed the powers of Council of Ministers, Legislative Assembly is curtailed in case of union territories, even if they have legislative assemblies. So with respect to prelims examination, the provisions dealing with and matters related to how the union territories are administered become very, very important, especially due to the recent dispute and the removal of the Lieutenant Governor of Puducherry, Ms. Kiran Bedi. Let us now move on to the next news. Effecting a social rise, starting a political experiment appears on page number 6. So the Government of India has tabled the Constitution Scheduled Caste Order Amendment Bill 2021 that seeks to give effect to a long-standing political demand which was about grouping 7 scheduled caste subsects in Tamil Nadu under the heritage name Devendra Kula Velalar. Now, in the statements of the objects and reasons of this particular bill, it highlights that the orders have been amended by the Acts of Parliament enacted under Clause 2 of Article 341. So let us understand that. So Article 341 says that with respect to state and union territories, the President, after consulting with the Governor, through public notifications specify the castes, races or tribes or parts of a group within the caste, race or tribes which shall for the purpose of this constitution be deemed to be scheduled castes in relation to that state or union territory. Under Article 341 Clause 2 of the Indian Constitution, Parliament is empowered to confer status of scheduled caste notified through a presidential list. So whenever we talk about classes like SCs and STs, their first categorization was done through a presidential order which notified all the scheduled caste with respect to each state and union territories. That was done through an executive order, that is presidential notification or presidential order. But any amendment or any change in the list, for example, inclusion or exclusion from the list of scheduled caste specified in a notification issued under Clause 1 shall be done by Parliament by law. So, although the first time categorization was executive in nature, but any further amendment to that list shall be done by Parliament by law and not through another notification. So that is one very important aspect to be remembered from the perspective of prelims examination. And similar is the provision with respect to scheduled tribes, which has been mentioned in Article 342, the article preceding Article 341. With respect to the state and union territories, the President, after consulting with the Governor, through public notification specify the tribes or tribal communities or parts or groups within the tribes or tribal communities which shall for the purpose of this constitution be deemed to be scheduled tribes in relation to that state or union territory. So there is just one takeaway from this particular discussion is that the addition or removal of any particular group in SC or ST requires the parliamentary approval by law. This next news appears on page number 1. Metroman Sreedharan set to join BJP may contest polls. Now Mr. Sreedharan has been stalwarts of India's engineering. He has been such a towering figure that for anyone, not just for UPSC aspirant, it is very important to know about what he has done in his life so that he gets so much of prominence in India. Also, from the perspective of essay and GS paper 4, the anecdotes and milestones which these people have set become very important in order to substantiate your answer or paragraph. So let us just look at 5 of the milestones which Mr. Sreedharan has set, which becomes very difficult to emulate not just for engineers in our country but for other public or civil servants. So Mr. Sreedharan is an engineer popularly known as Metroman, as we all know, who is credited with changing the face of public transport with his leadership in building a lot of projects across the country. An important fact is that he has been awarded both Padma Shri as well as Padma Vibhushan. And there are demands already going on for him to be rewarded with Bharat Ratna. So what he has done in his life to be awarded with such prestigious honors, starting with the construction or reconstruction of Pamban Bridge. So in December 1964, a cyclone washed away parts of Pamban Bridge that connected Rameshwaram to mainland Tamil Nadu. The railways set a target of 6 months for the bridge to be repaired, while Sreedharan's boss, under whose jurisdiction the bridge came, reduced it to 3 months. Sreedharan was put in charge of the execution and he restored the bridge in just 46 days. And his stupendous work was recognized and was awarded by the railway minister back in 1965. Then, in 1970, as the deputy chief minister, he was put in charge of the implementation, planning and design of Calcutta Metro or Kolkata Metro, the first ever metro in India. And so Sreedharan not only completed this much heralded project but also laid down the foundation of modern infrastructure engineering in India. Because just think about it, the kind of city Kolkata is, like any other old city in our country, it's very difficult to construct such a massive infrastructural project within time, and he delivered it right on time. So this is just the starting of his career. Being an engineer doesn't matter if you are a railway engineer or a ship engineer. The mindset has to be right, and so after that his next assignment was to put Cochin Shipyard Limited on track. When Sreedharan joined the Cochin Shipyard in October 1979, it was undergoing a phase of unproductivity. The production of its first ship, MV Rani Padmini, had been delayed for a long period. When Sreedharan took over, he turned the fortunes of the shipyard around and made sure its first ship was built while he was its chairman and managing director CMD. In 1981, under his leadership, the shipyard launched its first ship, MV Rani Padmini. And so for any engineer working for Indian Railways, these 3 projects would have been sufficient to claim the glory. But he was so invaluable that despite his retirement in 1990, he was roped in for another very challenging and difficult task, that was the construction of Konkan Railways. On his retirement in 1990, the government of India made it clear that Mr. Sreedharan is indispensable and his services would still be needed. And so he was appointed the CMD of Konkan Railways after his retirement on contract in 1990 by the then Railway Minister, Mr. George Fernandes. Under his leadership, the company executed its mandate in 7 years. The project was unique in many respects. It was the first major project in India to be undertaken on a build, operate and transfer basis. So build, operate and transfer is a kind of public-private partnership, and that is a matter of another discussion. But what you should recognize that Sreedharan has a very high adaptability as well, because this was the first time he was working in a setup which was very different from the complete government organization he was habitual of working. And the task was gargantuan because it had 93 tunnels along the length of 82 kilometers and involved tunneling through soft soil. The total project covered 760 kilometers and had over 150 bridges. and that a public sector project could be completed without significant cost and time overruns was considered an achievement by many. And so, that is why, when the first modern metro in our country, when it was planned to be constructed in Delhi, the obvious choice was Mr. E. Sreedharan. The Delhi Metro, which is also the crown jewel in all the projects which have been completed by Mr. E. Sreedharan so far. So he was made the managing director of Delhi Metro Rail Corporation by the then Delhi Chief Minister Sahib Singh Verma, and his stint in Delhi Metro has been considered so successful and crucial to India that in 2005 he was awarded Knight of the Legion of Honor by the government of France and Padma Vibhushan by government of India. And here, the experience of him having successfully constructed the Kolkata Metro or playing a key role in that came in very handy. He was particularly known for isolating his projects from political pressures and influences and winning political commitments for fast execution of projects. He had announced that he would retire by the end of 2005, but his tenure was further extended to oversee the completion of the second phase of Delhi Metro. After 16 years of his service with Delhi Metro, Sreedharan retired from service in 2011, but still as of now, he is looking after a lot of metro projects across the country. So having a look at some of the important snippets of his life, what are the values that we can derive from his life? Let us know in the comment section as to what are the important public service values for which Mr. E. Sreedharan is ideally suited for. Let us now move on to the next. So this last article for today's discussion appears on page number 2. AQI expected to be very poor today. And it is again time to revise AQI or Air Quality Index from the perspective of prelims examination. Because in 2016, UPSC had asked, in the cities of our country, which among the following atmospheric gases are normally considered in calculating the value of air quality index? Carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and methane. And so let us quickly go through this discussion and solve this previous year question. So the Air Quality Index is a tool for effective communication of air quality status to people in terms which are easy to understand. It transforms complex air quality data of various pollutants into single number, nomenclature and color, so that it becomes easy for a layman to understand whether the air she is breathing is polluted or clean. So there are 6 AQI categories: good, satisfactory, moderate, poor, very poor and severe. Each of these categories is decided based on the surrounding or the ambient concentration values of air pollutants and their likely health impacts. Air quality subindex and health breakpoints are evolved from 8 pollutants: PM10, PM2.5, NO2, SO2, carbon monoxide, O3, NH3 and lead or PB, for which short term up to 24 hours national ambient air quality standards are prescribed. And so you can clearly see that carbon dioxide is not one of the gases which are monitored, which leads to the rejection of all those options which contain 1, which means A is gone, C and so is D. We are left with just P. So if you had remembered only one of the options, that carbon dioxide is not one of the pollutants, you could have easily arrived at the right answer despite not knowing other gases. So based on measured ambient concentrations of pollutant, sub-index is calculated, which is linear function of concentration. It is not important to remember each and individual values, just that the 6 categories exist is more than sufficient.